It's really fascinating how just deciding where to put a town on a map can, well, completely shape its future.
It really can.
And today, we're jumping into the story of Hamburg, Arkansas. Its location tells us so much about its history. We actually got a great starting point from Ashley County historian K. Brad Barfield. He pointed out something really interesting about Hamburg being the county seat.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
He highlighted how its story is quite different from other nearby settlements.
That's a perfect way to look at it. We've been digging into Hamburg's history, and his point is spot on.
Right.
You had these earlier places like Fountain Hill up in the woodlands, sort of the first settlements.
Okay.
And then you had company towns, purpose-built, like Crosset. But Hamburg, its origin is different. It was deliberately placed.
Because it needed to be the county seat, centrally located.
Exactly. A totally different set of reasons for coming into existence.
So that's our mission today, for you listening. Figuring out how Hamburg became this central anchor for Ashley County.
We'll look at how it started, how it got through things like the Civil War, the railroad coming in.
The timber, the farming, all of that. And its culture, too.
Right. And how the population changed over the years.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning then. How did Ashley County itself, and then Hamburg, actually come about?
Well, the story kicks off when the Arkansas legislature officially created Ashley County. That was back in November 1848.
So step one, create the county.
Step one. Then step two was figuring out where the county seat should be. And the decision was pretty practical.
How so?
They aimed for a spot near the geographic center of this new county, make it accessible.
Well, makes sense. Fair for everyone trying to get to the courthouse, I guess.
Precisely. So that decision led directly to the founding of Hamburg.
And when did they actually, lay out the town?
That happened pretty quickly. In October 1849, they officially plotted it out.
And the name Hamburg. Where did that come from? There's often a story there.
There usually is. The common thinking is that it was named for Hamburg, South Carolina.
Ah, so settlers brought the name with them.
Seems like it. A lot of the early residents apparently came from that area. Now, there is some local talk about maybe a German connection, but the South Carolina link seems, more solid.
Interesting how those ties carry across states and time. So they picked the spot, named it. Did they get the government buildings up quickly?
They really did. By 1850, just a year after mapping it out, they already had a courthouse and a county jail built and functioning.
Wow, no messing around.
Nope. That really cemented its role right away as the county's administrative center. Then, a few years later, 1854, it was officially incorporated as a town.
So we went from just a designated spot to a proper legal town pretty fast, and it grew around the town square.
That's right. The town square was the heart of it. Early businesses, the first churches, they started popping up along Cherry and Adams streets, right there around the square.
Kind of the classic American town layout.
Very much so. And historical accounts talk about these founding families.
Prominent people, landowners.
Yeah, exactly. Landowners, leaders in the community who really guided that initial growth.
You can sort of picture it taking shape.
Yeah.
What was life actually like for those first people there? It must have been frontier life.
Oh, absolutely. It was all about connection to the land. Subsistence farming was key, growing corn, cotton, mostly just to get by.
Raising animals, too?
Yep. Hogs and cattle, mainly. And timber was everywhere, of course, so they used that. But getting it to market before the railroad, that was tough.
How they manage that?
Floating logs down the rivers and creeks, that was the main way back then.
Sounds like hard work. And you needed your neighbors, I bet.
Definitely. The sources really emphasize how close-knit the community was. People relied on each other.
How did they socialize?
Things like housewarmings, quilting parties. They had these things called play parties, and church gatherings were huge, socially as well as spiritually.
So before the Civil War, Hamburg was this small, but definitely important, courthouse town. The center point for the county.
That sums it up well. A modest but vital hub.
Okay, so Hamburg's established, it's the county seat. Then the Civil War hits. How did that impact the town?
Well, like most of the South, Hamburg's residents largely sided with the Confederacy.
But you sent soldiers.
They did. Several volunteer companies went off to join the 3rd Arkansas Infantry. They actually served under General Robert E. Lee.
Wow, right in the thick of it then.
And interestingly, a Hamburg local, Colonel Van H. Manning, commanded that regiment. He became quite prominent later, even served in Congress during Reconstruction.
So a direct local connection to major figures and events. Was Hamburg itself ever a battle site?
Thankfully, no. It managed to avoid any major battles on its soil, so it didn't suffer that kind of physical destruction you saw elsewhere.
But the war's end and Reconstruction must have still been felt.
Oh, definitely. The aftermath was significant. During Reconstruction, the Arkansas governor at the time, Powell Clayton, actually declared Ashley County to be in rebellion.
Really? What did that mean for Hamburg?
It meant state militia came in and briefly occupied the town.
That must have caused some friction.
It was a very tense period. The sources talk about heightened racial and political tensions, unfortunately leading to some isolated, tragic violence in the later 1860s, 1870s. It was a difficult era across the South.
Sobering part of the history.
It is. But despite all that turmoil, Hamburg kept its role as the county's administrative and commercial center.
And then came something that really changed the game, right? The railroad.
Absolutely. The arrival of the railroad in the late 1800s, that was a huge turning point for Hamburg.
How so? What did it change specifically?
It basically connected this relatively isolated inland town to the wider world. It became a real regional shipping point. And that connection just fueled economic growth.
So suddenly it's much easier to get goods in and out.
Much easier. And cheaper, too. This really unlocked the value of the local resources, especially timber.
Ah, so mills started popping up.
Exactly. Sawmills, planer mills to process all that timber. Cotton gins, too, because cotton farming was expanding. Even things like a box factory and a brick factory started in Hamburg.
So it wasn't just shipping raw stuff out. They started processing it locally.
Precisely. Adding value right there in town.
That must have brought more people, more businesses.
It did. To support the mills and the growing population, you saw general stores, all sorts of other businesses opening up, serving the town, serving the farms around it.
And this is when the downtown we see today started taking shape.
A lot of it, yes. Many of those historic brick buildings downtown were built during this boom time, mostly the 1880s and 1890s. That's why it's a National Register historic place. That era was critical.
You could almost feel the buzz of a town suddenly connected, growing.
Yeah, and you get glimpses of it from things like the old newspapers.
Yeah.
The Ashley County Eagle started in 1889.
What do the papers tell us?
They paint a picture of a thriving place. They mention local doctors, lawyers, hotels like one run by a Mrs. M.J. Files, even candy shops like J.B. Bunn's Confectionery. It shows Hamburg was becoming a real supply center for the whole county.
So the railroad really transformed it from that early courthouse town into something much more dynamic. Let's dig into those economic foundations, a bit more timber and agriculture. They seem key from the start.
They absolutely were. Right from day one, Hamburg's economy was tied to farming and forests, and its location was perfect for both.
How so?
Well, you had fertile prairie soil east and west of town, great for crops like cotton, later rice and soybeans, but then north and south, you had these huge forests, loads of timber.
A real mix of resources right there. How did they use them early on versus later?
Early on, it was smaller scale. Farming was mostly for survival, timber was for building locally, fuel, but then, especially in the late 1800s, timber became a major industry.
Because of the railroad again.
Exactly. Once they could mill the lumber locally and ship it out efficiently by rail, the whole game changed.
That sawmill boom must have shifted things for families too.
Big time. The sources say a lot of families went from just farming for themselves to working in logging, working in the sawmills.
And later, those big Georgia-Pacific mills nearby in Crossett must have drawn people too.
Definitely. That really cemented timber and wood products as a major employer for the whole region, including Hamburg. People's livelihoods became tied to that industry.
Okay, and what about the farming side? Cotton was big early on.
Huge, especially in the delta areas east of Hamburg. For a long time, late 1800s, early 1900s, cotton really was king around there.
In Hamburg's role.
It became a key processing center. Multiple cotton gins were set up right in town to handle all the cotton coming in from the farms. Being close to the delta made it a natural trading and ginning spot.
So not just growing it nearby, but central to processing it.
Right. And then later, farming diversified. Rice and soybeans became more important, especially on those prairie lands west of town.
Which leads to that interesting description of Hamburg.
Straddling the farm-forest divide. Yeah, it benefited from both the crops on the flatlands and the trees in the uplands. A unique position.
And all this activity needed shops and services, right?
Absolutely. The commercial sector grew right alongside farming and timber. By the 1890s, those brick buildings on the square housed general stores, clothing shops, drugstores, banks, everything people needed.
Were they mostly local businesses?
Yeah, often family-owned, passed down through generations. That really adds to the town's character, that continuity.
You mentioned the Ashley County Eagle started in 1889. That suggests a pretty established business community by then.
It does. Records show jewelers, lawyers, doctors, even a new hotel around that time. It was clearly growing up.
And then technology marches on.
Right. Telephone and electricity arrived in the early 1900s, connecting Hamburg even more. Later, mid-century, you saw some other industries try to take root garment factories, a flooring mill, trucking. Some lasted, some didn't.
But through it all,
Farming and forestry have remained the bedrock, still major employers today. It's right there in its heritage.
okay, so we had the economy. But what about the glue that holds a town together? The social side, the culture.
Yeah, that's just as important. And from the very beginning, churches and schools were absolutely central to Hamburg's community life and identity.
Which denominations were early?
Baptists and Methodists were among the first congregations established, and they weren't just places for Sunday service. They were real social hubs.
Community centers, almost.
In a way, yes. And you still see that history in buildings like the Hamburg Presbyterian Church, which goes back to 1871, or the First United Methodists, whose building dates to 1910. They're landmarks.
Stands to reason education would be important, too, in a county seat.
It was. Even before a full public system, they had private schools, like the Bowling Academy mentioned in the sources. Hamburg High School itself goes way back to the 1880s.
So a long tradition of schooling there.
Yes, with an early version opening in 1889. Now, like much of the South, they did have segregated schools for a long time. The sources note that integration happened in 1965 and apparently relatively peacefully compared to some places.
And today, is it still an educational center?
It is. The Hamburg School District is consolidated now, so it serves a wider area, drawing kids from surrounding communities. It's definitely still a hub for education.
And how did people find out what was going on, besides talking over the fence?
The local newspaper was crucial. We mentioned the Ashley County Eagle starting in 1889. It recorded everything: big news, small news, who got married, when school started.
At the pulse of the town.
Exactly. And other papers followed, like the Ashley County Leader, and today they have the Ashley County Ledger. It's this continuous story being written down.
That's fantastic. And I heard Hamburg has a pretty unique town festival, something involving armadillos.
Haha, yes, you heard right. The Armadillo Festival. It started back in 1970, and it's the big event every May.
What happened?
The whole town square just comes alive. Live music, tons of food, arts and crafts for sale, and the main event for many.
Armadillo races.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Seriously. Armadillo races. It's quirky, it's fun, and it really brings everyone together. The courthouse square, the Ashley County Museum, right there, they're focal points. It's a great mix of community fun and local history.
An armadillo festival. That's definitely memorable. It shows a town with real personality. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's a lasting impression of Hamburg? Its legacy.
Well, it feels like a place with really strong roots. There's a clear tradition of military service going way back, honored by the Ashley County War Memorial.
And those family names keep coming up.
Yes, those deep family ties names like Watson, Bunkley, Norman are woven into the town's history, often linked to leadership roles. The Ashley County Museum is even housed in the historic David Watson House.
This history is very present.
Very. And community life has always seemed important, from old court week gatherings and picnics to today, where things like high school sports and band are big community events. Plus, you have active civic clubs, Rotary, Lions, Masons still contributing.
It sounds like a community that values its connections past and present.
I think that's right. When you look at the town square today, the old storefronts, the gazebo where the original courthouse was, the memorial, those historic churches, the museum, you really do get a sense of that history living alongside the present day. There's a definite community spirit.
So let's circle back to that initial point from K. Bragg Barfield. We've explored the history now. How does Hamburg's story really contrast with those other Ashley County towns?
Well, it confirms his point perfectly, doesn't it? Hamburg's deliberate creation as the central county seat set it on a unique path.
Right. It wasn't like Fountain Hill, which just sort of grew organically earlier on.
Or like Crosset, which was built entirely around the lumber company's needs. Hamburg's primary reason for being, right from the start, was to be the governmental and consequently the commercial heart of the entire county.
That central planned function gave it a different kind of foundation.
Exactly. A foundational advantage, you could say. It allowed it to become this nucleus, governmental, economic, social pout for Ashley County in a way those other towns with different origins just didn't.
It really underscores how that initial decision, where to put the pin on the map, can echo down through generations, shaping a town's whole identity and trajectory.
Absolutely.
Maybe something for you listening to think about the origins of towns in your own area. What story does their location tell?
It's a fascinating lens to look through.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the history of Hamburg, Arkansas.